100 episodes ago, I started this podcast with a pretty simple idea. I wanted to talk about entrepreneurship without the mythology, not the crush it version, not the highlight reel, not the polished LinkedIn story where every mistake becomes a lesson, every failure becomes a blessing, and every founder somehow knew exactly what they were doing from day one. Because that wasn't my story. When I started my company back in 1992, I wasn't some perfectly prepared entrepreneur with a detailed plan, stack of investors, and a clear vision of the future. I was a reluctant entrepreneur. I had an idea, some technical knowledge, a lot of passion, and, if I'm being honest, more confidence than wisdom. I didn't fully understand the risks. I didn't fully understand the business, and I definitely didn't understand how much the company I was trying to build would eventually force me to grow. That's why this show exists. For 99 episodes, I've had the privilege of talking with entrepreneurs, founders, leaders, advisors, and business owners about the real journey, the uncertainty, the mistakes, the pivots, the pressure, the lonely moments, the unexpected wins, the lessons they couldn't have learned any other way. And now, on this 100th episode, I want to pause for just a moment. So today, there's no guest, there's no interview. Today, it's just me, looking back, saying thank you, and explaining why the story of the reluctant entrepreneur still matters. As I said earlier, this is the 100th episode, and that feels a little strange to say. When I started this show, I really didn't know if anyone would listen or watch. I didn't know if the format would work. I didn't know if entrepreneurs would be willing to talk openly about the real stuff, not just the polished version of the story. And I didn't know if there was an audience for conversations that were less about hype and more about truth. But here we are, 100 episodes later. So I want to use this episode to do three things. First, I want to talk about the mission of this podcast. Second, I want to express my gratitude to the guests, the listeners and viewers, and everyone who's supported the show. And third, I want to share a little bit about my own story, because that story is really the reason this podcast exists in the first place. The title of the show is not an accident. The Reluctant Entrepreneur is exactly what I was. I didn't grow up dreaming of starting a company. I didn't have a business plan tucked away in a drawer. I didn't have an MBA. I didn't have investors waiting in the wings to throw money at me. I didn't have a network of advisors. And I definitely didn't have a very well-developed understanding of risk. What I had was an idea. And maybe worse, I had passion. I say worse because passion is often presented as the magic ingredient that makes entrepreneurship work. And yes, passion matters. Passion can get you moving. Passion can help you survive very long days, sleepless nights, and endless obstacles. Passion is the high-octane starter fluid down the carburetor. But passion by itself is not a business strategy. Passion doesn't make payroll. Passion doesn't create cash flow. Passion doesn't fix a broken process, rescue a bad hire, pay a vendor, satisfy a customer, or make a bank feel better when your numbers don't look very good. Passion is powerful, but it can also be dangerous when it's not balanced with discipline, humility, and good judgment. And in the early days, I had plenty of passion. Discipline, humility, judgment, that came later. My entrepreneurial journey started in 1992 when I founded my company. I had designed a product that I believed in, and I couldn't convince my employer to build it. I tried. I made the case. I believed there was a market. I believed the product solved a real problem. But the answer was always no. At some point, I had a choice. I could let the idea die, or I can try to bring it to life myself. So I started a company. That sounds noble in hindsight. It sounds brave, maybe even strategic. But the truth is a little less flattering. I started a company because I was passionate, stubborn, naive, and probably a little arrogant. Okay, maybe more than a little. I had strong technical skills. I understood the product. I understood the problem it solved. I understood the industry, but I didn't understand business. Not really. And that's one of the great traps of entrepreneurship. Being good at a product, a service, a craft, a technology, or an idea doesn't automatically make you good at running a business around it. Those are two very different things. You can be an excellent engineer and a terrible CEO. You can be a brilliant salesperson and a terrible manager. You can be a gifted designer and have no idea how to price your work. You can build something customers love and still run out of cash. That's the uncomfortable truth that many entrepreneurs learn the hard way. I certainly did. In the beginning, I had what I now jokingly call my original business assets: ego, passion, arrogance, ignorance, and perhaps above all, a very poor assessment of risk. And oddly enough, some of those traits helped me get started. Ignorance really can be bliss in those early days. If I fully understand how hard it was going to be, if I fully understood that 80% of all businesses ultimately fail, I'm not sure I would have done it. If I had known every problem waiting for me, I might have talked myself out of starting. Sometimes you need just enough ignorance to begin, but you can't build a sustainable company on ignorance. Eventually, the very traits that help you start can become the traits that threaten to destroy you. The confidence that can get you moving can become arrogance. The passion that gives you energy can become impatience. The willingness to take risks can become recklessness. And the refusal to quit can become the refusal to listen. That's where the real entrepreneurial journey begins. Not when you start the company, not when you get your first customer, not when you make your first sale. The real journey begins when you realize the company won't survive unless you change. That was so true for me. I had to grow into the role. I had to develop business acumen. I had to learn how to lead. I had to learn how to listen. I had to learn that a company isn't built simply on having a good product. It's built through systems, people, decisions, trust, cash flow, culture, and discipline. I had to learn that being right about the product doesn't mean I was right about everything else. Some lessons took time. Some lessons were expensive. Some were embarrassing. Some were painful. I think most were painful. And some were the kind of lessons you only appreciate years later, after you've had enough distance to understand what they were really trying to teach you. That experience eventually led me to write The Reluctant Entrepreneur, and that book eventually led me here. The mission of the show is simple. I want to have honest conversations about entrepreneurship. Not the fantasy version, not the social media version, not the version where every founder is a visionary, every failure is a badge of honor, every setback is just a setup for a comeback, and every business story ends with a perfect exit and a smiling photo on LinkedIn. I'm interested in the real version, the version with uncertainty, the version with fear, the version with mistakes, the version where sometimes you make the wrong decision for the right reason. The version where you hire the wrong person, trust the wrong partner, misread the market, price too low, scale too fast, wait too long, or confuse revenue with success. The version where you think the problem is marketing, but it's actually positioning. Or you think the problem is sales, but it's actually trust. Or you think the problem is customers, but it's actually your own unwillingness to adapt. Entrepreneurship is often celebrated from the outside, but it's lived from the inside. And from the inside, it can be lonely. That loneliness is part of why I wanted to create this show. I wanted entrepreneurs to hear other entrepreneurs talk about things that usually don't make it into the press releases. I wanted people to hear the full story, not just the highlight reel. Every guest who comes onto the show has a different background, a different business, a different path, a different definition of success. But there are common threads. Most entrepreneurs aren't as confident as they look. Most have moments when they wonder if they've made a terrible mistake. Most carry burdens their employees, customers, friends, or even family may never fully see. Most have had to reinvent themselves at least once. And almost all of them have learned that entrepreneurship is less about having all the answers and more about becoming the kind of person who can keep learning. And that's what fascinates me. The business is one story. The entrepreneur is another. And often the entrepreneur's transformation is the more important story. That's why this podcast isn't just about businesses. It's about people. It's about the person behind the company, the person who took the risk, the person who endured the failure, the person who made the payroll, the person who signed the lease, the person who laid awake at night wondering how this was all going to work, the person who had to decide whether to keep going, pivot, sell, shut down, or start again. That's the story I care about. Entrepreneurship is too often reduced to slogans. Follow your passion, never give up, fail fast, hustle harder, believe in yourself. Those sayings may contain pieces of truth, but they're incomplete. Follow your passion? Sure, but understand your numbers. Never give up unless giving up is the wise thing to do. Fail fast, but make sure you actually learn something useful. Hustle harder, but don't confuse exhaustion with progress. Believe in yourself, but don't believe yourself so much that you stop listening. That's the kind of nuance I want the show to explore. Real entrepreneurship lives in the nuance. It lives in the tension between optimism and reality. It lives in the tension between confidence and humility. It lives in the tension between taking risks and managing risk. It lives in the tension between building something meaningful and making sure that something can actually survive. That's the mission of the Reluctant Entrepreneur podcast, to tell the truth about the journey, to give entrepreneurs a place to tell the whole story, to help listeners learn from people who've been there, and remind current and future entrepreneurs that they're not alone. They're not crazy, well, maybe just a little, and they're not the only ones who've struggled. It's also to challenge the idea that entrepreneurship is only valuable when it looks glamorous. It rarely does, at least not from the inside. I want to take a moment to say thank you. First, thank you to my guests. A podcast like this only works if people are willing to be open, and I've been fortunate to speak with guests who've shared not only their success, but also their doubts, mistakes, failures, lessons, and turning points. It's easy to come on a podcast and promote yourself. It's harder to come on a podcast and tell the truth. So to every guest who's joined me, thank you. Thank you for trusting me with your story. Thank you for giving the audience something more valuable than a polished pitch. Thank you for being willing to talk about the messy middle, not just the victorious ending. I also want to thank my listeners and viewers. Whether you've listened or watched one episode, 10 episodes, or all 100, I appreciate you. Your time matters. Attention is valuable, and the fact that you chose to spend some of that time with this show means a great deal to me. Some of you are entrepreneurs. Some of you want to become entrepreneurs. Some of you are business owners. Some of you are employees who want to better understand the people who start and run companies. And some of you may have no intention of starting a business at all, but you enjoy hearing honest stories about ambition, risk, resilience, and growth. Whatever brought you here, thank you. The show exists because the conversations matter, but it continues because people listen, people watch. I'm also grateful for everyone who has recommended a guest, shared an episode, sent a note, offered feedback, or simply told me that something in a conversation resonated with them. Those moments matter far more than you may realize. Podcasting can be a strange thing. Most of the time, you record a conversation, publish it, and send it out into the world. You don't always know what landed. You don't always know whether a sentence helped someone exactly at the right time. So when someone reaches out and says, that episode meant something to me, it matters. It keeps the mission alive. Keep it coming. And finally, I want to say thank you to entrepreneurs, not just the ones who've been on the show, but the entrepreneurs who are out there right now doing the work. The ones who are still in the struggle, the ones who are building something from scratch, the ones who are trying to keep something alive, the ones who are trying to reinvent something that used to work but doesn't anymore. The ones who are wondering if they're too early, too late, too small, too inexperienced, too old, too young, or too tired. I see you. And more importantly, many of the guests on this show see you too. And that's why we tell these stories. Not to pretend that entrepreneurship is easy, not to discourage anyone from trying, but to tell the truth in a way that makes the road look a little less lonely. And as I look back on 100 episodes, I realize this podcast has taught me a lot. It's reminded me that success is deeply personal. For one entrepreneur, success might mean building a company big enough to sell. For another, it might mean creating freedom. For another, it might mean providing something for themselves. For another, it might mean serving a community. For another, it might mean building a business that supports a family, provides good jobs, and allows them to sleep at night. That's why I ask every guest this question. How did you define success when you first started your business, and how do you define it today? That question matters because the answer almost always changes. In the beginning, success often looks external: revenue, growth, recognition, awards, customers, market share, a bigger office, a larger team, a louder brand. But over time, many entrepreneurs begin to define success differently. Peace of mind, better decisions, healthier relationships, a stronger team, freedom, more meaningful work, the ability to say no, the ability to step away, the ability to build something that doesn't consume everything else. That evolution is important. And I think it's one of the most under-discussed parts of entrepreneurship. The business changes, the market changes, the customers change, but the entrepreneur has to change too. And that's certainly been true in my life. I'm not the same person I was when I started my company in 1992. I couldn't be. That younger version of me had energy, passion, and drive. And I'm grateful for that because without him, the company would never have started. But he also had blind spots. He had to learn. He had to be humbled. He had to make mistakes. He had to become a better leader, better business person, and frankly, a better version of himself. That's what entrepreneurship did for me. It didn't just give me a company. It forced me to grow. And that growth is why I'm so interested in the journeys of other entrepreneurs, because behind almost every business story is a human transformation story. Someone starts out thinking they're building a company, and then one day they realize the company has been building them. That's the heart of this podcast. So, what comes next? More conversations, more honest stories, more guests who are willing to talk about their real journey, more lessons from people who have succeeded, failed, adapted, rebuilt, and kept going. And more reminders that entrepreneurship is not reserved for the perfectly prepared. Sometimes it begins with someone who's not ready, someone reluctant, someone uncertain, someone who simply sees a problem, has an idea, and decides to take one step forward before they fully understand what that step will require. That was me. And maybe that was you. Or maybe it will be. I've also added a new series to this podcast called Reluctant Lessons, When Businesses Go Wrong. On this series, I take a slightly different approach, but it supports the same mission. Instead of interviewing entrepreneurs about their personal journeys, Reluctant Lessons looked at companies that rose, stumbled, collapsed, and lost their way, and asks what entrepreneurs, leaders, and business owners can learn from these stories. These are not stories told to mock failure or pretend the answers were obvious at the time. They're stories about patterns, blind spots, culture, leadership, timing, arrogance, denial, and change. Companies rarely fail because of one bad decision. More often, they fail because of a series of decisions, assumptions, or warning signs that went unchallenged for too long. In this series, I profiled companies like Borders, a giant in the book business that was slow to adapt as the world moved online. I've talked about Theranos, where vision, secrecy, hype, and credibility became a dangerous combination. We've looked at WeWork, where ambition, storytelling, and massive investment eventually collided with the reality of economics. I've covered Enron, a company that reminds us what can happen when intelligence and complexity outrun ethics. We've also covered Toys R Us, Blockbuster, Kodak, DeLorean Motor Company, and others. As it turns out, there's no shortage. Those stories are different from the guest interviews because they belong here because entrepreneurship isn't just about learning from people who succeed. It's also about learning from companies that failed, companies that changed too slowly, companies that grew too fast, and companies that believed their own story a little too much. Because the goal isn't to become cynical. The goal is to become wiser. Either way, I hope the show continues to be useful. I hope it continues to be honest. I hope it continues to challenge the mythology of entrepreneurship while still honoring the courage it takes to build something. Because both things can be true. Entrepreneurship can be brutally hard and it can be deeply meaningful. It can be risky and it can be rewarding. It can expose your weakness and it can reveal strengths you didn't know you had. It can humble you and it can give you purpose. That's why I keep having these conversations, and that's why I'm grateful to have reached episode 100. So, thank you. Thank you for listening or watching. Thank you for sharing the show. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for valuing honest stories over easy slogans. And thank you for allowing me to continue exploring what it really means to be an entrepreneur. I'll close this episode the way I always close conversations with my guests, but this time I'll answer the question myself. How did I define success when I first started my business, and how do I define it today? When I first started, success meant survival. It meant sales, it meant growth, it meant recognition. But today, success means something different. Success means building something that matters without losing yourself in the process. It means learning from your mistakes instead of being defined by them. It means creating value for others. It means staying curious. It means being useful. And maybe, most importantly, it means becoming wise enough to know that the business is not the whole story. The person you become along the way matters just as much, probably more. If you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable, it's available in paperback and Kindle versions on Amazon and as an audiobook in both Audible and Amazon. And to everyone listening or watching, if you find yourself stepping into entrepreneurship, whether by choice or by circumstance, remember this: sometimes the path we never planned becomes the journey we were meant to take. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being part, hopefully, of all 100 episodes. I truly appreciate you, and I'll see you again soon.